Congratulations on your story, The Final Overture of Roy. I really loved it. It was a story full of energy and dialogue and fast-paced dramatic scenes. And your characters, Roy and Jack, are living on the edge. The narrator says it's a big day for both of us, a transition to a new life. So it catches the characters in a moment of change and you feel like you go for a ride with them in a shopping trolley. Your story deals with a number of issues, John, including homelessness, the concepts of freedom and the pressures of family. You mentioned that you've done theatre. The theatre that you've done has a political element. Can you tell us how this influenced the themes and the style of your story, The Final Overture of Roy?
Yeah, well, yes. Well, the thing was, when I came back from Canada, I got involved with the theatre because I went to the National Playwrights Conference with a small piece I'd written. Then I came back to Brisbane and I was asked to join a particular play called Happy Birthdays Timor, where Timor was invaded. So I then got involved with the popular theatre troupe and Adler One, which was burning with energy, and particularly energy for young writers and writers with a different perspective. And they were surrounded by young people who were very politically active, because if you remember in the 70s, we had the great joy of being able to struggle against the kind of demons that Joe put out on the streets. And during that period, our house was actually watched by a special branch, but I don't think they got much from us except for the struggle we had with nappy buckets. But many of our actor friends were put in the clink because they were out on the streets. Being a writer, of course, I had the coward's viewpoint that I would stand and watch, and did so. But so that was the part of it. Then I went on and wrote a play called Irish Stew, which got great acclaim, and then a couple of other plays which went in different directions, sort of in the theatre. So the theatre is not a place where sometimes you get a lot of joy in terms of production or whatever, but along the way you come in contact with many people. So for nearly 25 years I was involved on the fringe of theatre, sometimes managing to get to the edge, but never quite getting through the door. So that was the experience I had from theatre. But along the way also, I'm sort of a hack. I wrote for travel magazines, I wrote for newspapers. As well as being a head of an English department, I wrote film crit and poetry and short stories and so on. So, blibs and blabs and blabs. But that's been my life in writing.
Well, your blibs and blabs come out pretty well in this story because it really has that theatrical feel about it, John. And there are a lot, for me anyway, a lot of really laugh out loud moments. I love the humour in this story. Roy and Jack live in a collection of stainless steel modules, shopping trolleys. And your narrator says, if more home buyers considered mobiles like we have, it'd take a lot of heat off the market. But at the same time, as a laugh out loud moment, it's incredibly sad too. So it's an uncomfortable sort of laughter. How do you imagine, manage to combine this with humour and empathy with your characters, the humour and that flip side of it being a sad situation?
I think it's part of my persona. I think I was the boy in the classroom with the nuns when someone was getting a flogging. A wry smile would come across my face, and I'd be the next one getting a flogging. But I'd see the humour, I'd see the terrible tension, but I also see the humour in the boy or girl, not much girl, but mostly boys jumping around the room while the nun gave them a whipping, and so you got that sense of tragedy going on, as well as, and this to me, got me in a lot of trouble, and it continued to get me in a lot of trouble all through life. But that's just how I see the world. I can see the flip side. I sort of see the flip side of the world as well. And gradually, as it emerged in the 70s, the dire straits that were going on with people's lives, and yet we were tending to ignore it. Like things like $950 billion worth of wealth in the United States is owned by 1% of the population. That sort of thing. And then you go through San Diego and the back sections of San Diego, and people are actually living in shopping trolleys arranged, much the same as Roy and Jack have got. But they start off you know, sort of very early in the piece. So that kind of, it's like a comic relief, if you like.
A comic relief is a good way of describing it. Yeah, it is. It's you know, it is. There's a lot of humor in it. It's not easy to write humor, but it seems when I'm reading yours, it comes naturally. You don't sort of seem to have had to think, I'm going to inject humor in this story. It does seem to come out naturally. Your narrator says that with Roy, everything is largely operatic, which sets the scene for the operatic scenes that follow. Can you talk about why you've created this operatic setting? Because it's not just what happens, it's where the action takes place.
Yeah, well, it really moves from the centralist back areas of the park, the parking area in the shopping centre, to the main centre of the stage, and this has been their life, and that to me is really, you know, sort of part of the comic opera that's there. But in the background is this overriding seriousness of the kind of music that's going on at the same time. And when I wrote this piece, and I write mostly, I listen to music of all kinds. You know, I just shut out the world and go into my own world, which is often a distraction to people. And I think writers, probably a lot of writers, live like this. One half of their brain is trying to function in the cognitive ordinary area, and the other half of the brain says, "Bugger off! I want to do this in a creative way." So in that sense, that sense of opera then emerged in this, you know, and it started with Bach and you know, sort of Mahler's Fifth, you know, particularly I think it's the central series, section 4 of Mahler, you know, where you get this amazing, you know, sort of contrapuntal arrangement of seriousness, but I inject these comic characters into that, which is almost like a sin, I know, but you know, I'm now allowed to commit a lot of sins at my age, so you know, I guess that's it. But this story has evolved, you know, like as I think probably in the earlier section of when I submitted the story, people, I don't know what people's reactions were, but it wasn't ready for them, or they weren't ready for it. The story wasn't ready for it, and I think, you know, like writers, you know, that we're saying somewhere, I don't know, we're the legislators of the future in that sense. So maybe the future has arrived, and so the story arrived at the same time. Whereas, you know, earlier.
So it was time for the story. If there was a soundtrack to the Final Overture of Roy, what would the soundtrack be?
Well, I couldn't decide on anything, but I would say that, you know, that you've got the 1812 at the beginning, but there's that area of sadness of Mahler that it roaming through the background. You know, I think it's one of the things that you asked me, I think it was the other day, and that there's an overriding that sadness as well. And meanwhile, in front of house, you've got this sense of comedy. And when I wrote Irish Stew, people took it as a tremendous comedy. So one night they decided they'd play it straight, you know, just take the edge off the comedy. And so they played it straight. People were very upset because they paid to come and see a comedy, but it was a very tragic play, and it was a metaphor for what was going on here in the States. You know, probably it wouldn't get put on today, it would be seen as, you know, racist, or somebody would interpret it as whatever, but it wasn't. Because you couldn't write about things like that in Queen. I mean, really, you couldn't write about them. You know, the Wallopers would turn up on the door. I can tell you incredible stories about people even one man being arrested for murder on a Friday night by two coppers and then taken away and then not seen for 4 days. You know, so that's the sort of thing that it was. So, you know, that's why I wrote it like that. So when you grow up and when you're in that environment, you're aware of that. So. That, in essence, is the drama of it as well, in that sense, you know, so that metaphorical aspect.
So we'd be listening to 1812 while we're listening to this.
Sorry, say that again.
You're listening to 1812.
Yeah, and Mahler, and of course a lot of other things as well. I mean, I like aspects of Vangelis, that section in Direct, where you just suddenly begin to float into space, you know, like that these guys are floating in space in a way too, and they're creating their own world. And you know, I try to do that for them, create their own world, and also the people around them are living in this own world. From the elderly they bump into, you know, I'm one of the old men with the shiny pants sitting on the seat, you know, with my, you know, out to it, so to speak. You know, so you've got all these other.
The scene setting's great. The scene setting is fantastic, and it just reaches this crescendo, doesn't it? And so, you know, what did you want the reader to think about after reading your story, John?
Well, first of all, you know, you hope that they enjoy it. But there's a balance of tension in the story, but that sense of, I guess, sympathy or empathy for where we are at, and things that I experienced in my life in the early stages of my life, when we were socially, in many respects, equal in a way, and financially equal, and the idea of poverty and richness, you know, like, and riches didn't, you know, there wasn't the huge differences that we see now, and the sort of luxury we live in versus, you know, the people who are, you know, children. And you know, Bob Hawke said there will be no child living in poverty, and it's like, where are we? You know, and it's not, I'm not talking about poverty, they haven't got Kellogg's cornflakes or whatever. I'm talking about poverty and so many other social things. So there's that aspect, but I don't want people crying over it. I mean, you can't politically change people's minds in a short story or a play, but you can expose people, hopefully, for an experience. So when they go and have their coffee and their croissant, you know, there's an aspect that they can talk about and empathise with. And our family have been, you know, my wife and children have been involved in a lot of things like that all our lives, helping people. So.
It's very, very thought-provoking and funny at the same time. So it's a, you know, really interesting, you know, tragicomedy balance that you've pulled off there. John, could you now read a section of your story for us, please?
Okay, I'll attempt to do that as best I can. I picked a little section that towards the end. His hands begin to leap across the keyboard. The crowd love it and chant back at him. The colour is amazing in the crowd, and they wave their off-the-rack clothing back and forth. Parasites, bums, dole bludgers, and of course their favourite saying are all shouted with full nasal force. He pauses and holds everybody in suspense, hands suspended above the keyboard. Whatever! Now it's my moment. I introduce Roy from my roving mic. Ladies and gentlemen, products of Western materialistic narcissism. The place is rocking. They love big words. Narcissism, they shout back. Boy, it's great to be alive. I work my way through the crowd. I push here and shove there. I roar into night. Selfies we might be, but at least we've learned one thing, the value of entertainment. And here he is, the boy brought up in a trolley, Roy. So there he goes.
Thank you so much, John. It was great to talk to you, and congratulations on your story being shortlisted.
Thank you very much.